Story number 1. I work in this really big factory that's got so many floors you could get lost for days. But there's this one floor, right at the bottom, that nobody's allowed to go to. It's super mysterious. My friends and I always talk about what could be down there. Some say it's just old stuff they don't use anymore, but I've heard different. There's this weird humming sound that comes from down there every night, and it's kind of spooky. One night I was working super late because I wanted extra money for a new bike. The factory was super quiet, and that's when I decided I was going to be brave and check out the bottom floor. I felt like a detective in a movie. The elevator ride down felt like forever, like I was going into another world or something. When the doors opened, I saw this long hallway that looked super old and creepy. The lights were kind of flickering, and it was really quiet. Like, too quiet. I walked really slowly because I was a bit scared, to be honest. Then, I heard this weird noise, like something was breathing, but not like a person. More like a monster from my video games. It was super weird, and I wanted to run away, but I also really wanted to know what it was. I kept walking until I found this big metal door. It looked really old and had all these dents on it, like something big had hit it. I pushed it open, and the room was dark and smelled like my grandpa's old shed. Inside the room, there were these giant machines. They weren't like the ones we use upstairs for making stuff. These machines looked like they were alive. They had stuff that looked like veins and muscles, and they were moving and making noises. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen. I wanted to leave, but then I saw someone in the corner of the room. It was Mr. Jenkins, who works on my floor. But he looked really weird, like a zombie or something. His eyes were all empty, and he was walking towards me in a really creepy way. I ran back to the elevator as fast as I could. I could hear Mr. Jenkins coming after me, which was super scary. I kept pressing the elevator button, and when the doors finally closed, I saw Mr. Jenkins reach out his hand like he wanted to grab me. Story number 2. I always thought working at the electronics factory would be boring, just the usual stuff, assembling parts, checking screens, and the endless hum of machines. But things got really weird last month. It started off like any normal day. I was working alongside my buddy Mark, fixing up some circuit boards, when something fell from the ceiling and landed with a thud near our feet. It was an old watch, kind of rusty, but it looked familiar. Mark picked it up and turned it over in his hands. "Isn't this Mr. Henderson's, the guy who vanished last year?" I remembered Mr. Henderson. He was nice, always had a joke ready to make the shift pass faster. Then one day, he just didn't show up. Management said he quit, but it never felt right. I looked at Mark, and without saying anything, we both knew we had to figure out where this watch came from. We decided to snoop around after our shift. The factory was huge, with lots of old sections no one used anymore. We found ourselves in the basement, where the light was dim and the air felt heavy. There, hidden behind some old storage racks, was a conveyor belt I'd never seen before. It was moving slowly, carrying more personal stuff, a scarf, a photo frame, and a lunchbox. My heart was racing. This was not normal. "Let's follow it," Mark whispered. So we did, walking alongside the conveyor belt as it snaked through the basement. It led to a small room, cramped with monitors and stacks of papers. The monitors showed different parts of the factory, some places I didn't even know existed. And the papers, they were filled with names, dates, and personal details of employees, many of whom had left suddenly. We heard footsteps and ducked under a desk. 2 men walked in, talking in low voices. "The next shipment is ready. We've got enough data to create another batch of IDs," one said. My stomach turned. They were stealing our co-workers' identities. The other man laughed. "Yeah, and with Henderson's watch, we'll make a fortune." Mark and I waited until they left, then bolted. We had to tell someone, but who? We couldn't trust management. They might be in on it. We decided to gather evidence ourselves. The next few days were nerve-wracking. We sneaked around, taking photos of the papers in the room. But we needed something big to expose these creeps. That's when we learned about the shipment. We overheard the men talking about moving a bunch of stuff that night. "This is it," Mark said. "We catch them in the act." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. Night came, and we hid near the conveyor belt. The clock ticked loudly in my ears as we waited. Then we heard them, the sound of heavy boxes and muffled voices. We peeked out and saw the men loading boxes onto a truck. Mark grabbed his phone to take a video, but just then, one of the boxes fell, and out rolled a bunch of ID cards and passports, all with photos of Mr. Henderson, but different names. The men spotted us. "Hey!" one shouted. My heart jumped to my throat. We ran, the men chasing us through the maze of conveyor belts and machines. I could hear their footsteps right behind us. We managed to lose them and hide. Mark was shaking. "We need to get out and show this to someone," he whispered. I agreed. We snuck out a side door and ran to the nearest police station. The cops were shocked by our story and came immediately. They found the hidden room, the IDs, everything. Turns out the factory management was part of a big identity theft ring. They'd been using employee data to create fake identities and selling them. It was a massive scandal. Story number 3. I never liked the night shift at the factory. It's not just the weird hours, but the way everything looks different in the dark. The shadows, the silence, it all gets to you. But hey, a job's a job, right? It was a Thursday night or maybe Friday morning. Time blurs when the world's asleep, and you're stuck with machines for company. There I was, half asleep, half working, when the big press machine started making this strange clunking noise. Not the regular clunk-clunk, but something off. "Did you hear that?" I asked Sam, who was on the shift with me. He shrugged. "Probably nothing. This old junk makes noise all the time." But it wasn't nothing. The noise grew louder, and then with a deafening bang, everything went dark. The machine had blown a fuse or something, plunging us into darkness. "Great," muttered Sam, fumbling for his phone. No signal. Typical. We decided to make our way to the exit, but something was off. The layout of the factory seemed different, like the corridors had shifted. We should have reached the door in a few minutes, but it felt like we were walking in circles. "Are we lost?" I whispered. The dark made me uneasy. Factories aren't meant to be quiet. The silence was unnerving. "No, we can't be," Sam insisted, but his voice betrayed his confidence. That's when we heard it. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. It was coming from behind us. We froze. "Maybe it's just another machine," I said, trying to sound brave. "We need to hide," Sam said, pulling me towards a small storage room. We huddled in there, listening. The dragging sound stopped, replaced by a tapping, like someone, or something, tapping on the walls. Tap, 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 moving around the room, surrounding us. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. The factory felt alive, hostile, like it wanted us gone. Sam and I didn't speak. We didn't dare. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A low growl echoed through the walls, a sound so menacing it made my blood run cold. "We need to get out," I whispered. Sam nodded. We crept out of the storage room, moving as quietly as we could. The factory was a labyrinth, a maze of metal and shadows. The exit seemed like a distant dream. Then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, standing at the end of the corridor. It was too dark to make out features, but I knew it wasn't human. It was something else, something wrong. "Run!" I shouted, and we did. We ran through the corridors, the sound of our footsteps echoing loudly. The figure was chasing us, I could hear it. A metallic clanging, getting closer and closer. We finally saw the exit sign, a beacon of hope. But it was blocked by debris, pieces of the machine that had malfunctioned. We started to move the debris, hands trembling, hearts racing. The clanging was right behind us now. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I did, I'd be frozen in terror. With one final push, we cleared the path and stumbled out into the night. The cool air never felt so good. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, far from the factory.